Now, complex sentences, complex is a synonym for difficult. But you already know exactly what complex sentences are because that's exactly what we talked about on Wednesday. Those sentences with a dependent and an independent clause put together, those are complex sentences. So everything that we wrote on the board when we were doing the guided practice and everything that you did on your independent practice was all complex sentences. You probably noticed that some of the stuff I gave you had the words complex sentences on it, and I said ignore it. We're going to talk more about that on Friday. Well, complex sentences is what we were doing the whole time. We're just putting a name to it. So, what is the definition of complex sentence? What exactly is a complex sentence? Well, it's a sentence with one or more independent clauses combined with one or more dependent, I can never spell that word, dependent clauses. Now, mostly what we're going to be working with today are just one independent clause combined with one dependent clause using a connecting word. And that's that list we made yesterday, where we had because, since, as soon as, when, why, whatever. All those that list we made yesterday. Those are connecting words. So remember, this does not include and, but, or. So complex sentences are not combined with and, but, or. What types of sentences, who remembers from last week, what types of sentences are combined using and, but, or? What types of sentences are combined using and, but, or? If you're not sure, the answer is not here. What types of sentences are combined using and, but, or? Carla?
Clause.
Nope, not dependent clauses. Kingston? Not compound subject and predicate, but compound. Compound sentences are combined using and, but, or. Remember, compound sentences are made up of two independent clauses combined with and, but, or. Complex sentences are an independent clause combined with a dependent clause not using and, but, or. So compound sentences have two or more independent clauses combined with and, but, or. Complex sentences have an independent clause and a dependent clause combined with a word that is not and, but, or. Remember, what is a dependent clause? What is a dependent clause? What is a dependent clause? Michaela? No. Aaron?
A clause that cannot stand alone.
A clause that cannot stand alone is a sentence. A clause has what two things?
A group of words that contains a subject and a predicate.
So a clause has a subject and a predicate. which we think, oh, that means it's a complete sentence. Not if it's a dependent clause. A dependent clause has a subject and a predicate, but can't stand alone as a sentence because it starts with one of those connecting words that we talked about on Wednesday. Not, and, but, or. That's the only reason. You can say, I have a sandwich. That has a subject, I. It has a predicate, have. It makes sense. I have a sandwich. But if I just added a connecting word at the beginning, because, is that a complete sentence anymore? Because I have a sandwich. Class?
No.
No. So dependent clauses are independent clauses that start with a connecting word. Dependent clauses are independent clauses with a connecting word at the beginning. So for example, the independent clause, does everybody know what I mean when I put IC? If you need to spell out independent clause, well, it's right here. An example of an independent clause is, I have a sandwich. An example of a dependent clause, if you need to spell out dependent clause so that you know exactly what it means, do that, is because I have a sandwich. It no longer makes sense without more information. You need to know, why is that word because there? So independent clause can stand alone. I have a sandwich. That's all the information you really need. If you need more information, it's just because you're curious, not because you need it in order for it to make sense. A dependent clause has a connecting word that makes it not make sense anymore. Because I have a sandwich. Well, you do have more questions because you're like, why is that word because there? Because you have a sandwich, what? About erasing until you've written it, then you can go back and erase. Because I have to erase, I'm going to erase from here to here because I want to give you an example of a complex sentence. If you have a dependent clause, you need to make a complex sentence in order for that part to make sense. So I have to erase. Can I erase from dependent clauses or independent clauses down? So now, an example of a complex sentence. I'm going to give you an example of a complex sentence. I won't be hungry because I have a sandwich. We have that independent clause, I won't be hungry. It makes sense all by itself. We have a subject, I, a predicate, won't be hungry. The only questions you have about it are if you're curious. And then we have our dependent clause. Because, oops, not IP, IC. Our independent clause. And then we have our dependent clause, because I have a sandwich. It has a subject, I. It has a predicate, have, or have a sandwich. But that word because means it can't be by itself. It doesn't make sense on its own. You do have the question, why do you have the word because? Well, when you have a complex sentence, you've already answered. Why do I have the word because? Because I'm saying I won't be hungry. I won't be hungry because I have a sandwich. So in order to make a dependent clause make sense, you have to add an independent clause that tells why that connecting word is there. So in order for a dependent clause to make sense, you have to turn it into a complex sentence. Add an independent clause, and then your dependent clause should make sense. I won't be hungry because I have a sandwich. Okay, now let's talk about punctuation with complex sentences. Can I erase everything that's on the board?
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with the top. Remember, would we use and, but, or in a complex sentence, unless we're just combining subjects or predicates?
No.
No. We would only have and, but, or if we have compound subjects or compound predicates, not to connect the two clauses. If we used and, but, or to connect the two clauses, it would look like this. I won't be hungry and because I have a sandwich. Does that make sense?
Mm-mm.
No. Because we can't use and, but, or before a connecting word like because, since, as soon as, whatever. Okay. So now, punctuation with complex sentences. So punctuation in complex sentences. When an independent clause comes before the dependent clause, you do not need a comma between clauses. When the independent clause comes first, the part that can stand alone comes first, you do not need a comma between clauses. So that means your sentence would not start with a connecting word. For example, I got up after I heard the alarm. we have the independent clause, I got up. Subject I, predicate got up. We don't have any more questions, unless we're curious, but it makes sense, I got up. And then we have our dependent clause, after I heard the alarm. We have our subject, I. We have the predicate, heard the alarm. But that word after makes us have questions. After I heard the alarm. Well, after the alarm, what? Why'd you use the word after? After you heard the alarm, what happened? I don't understand. But if you put that dependent clause with an independent clause to make a complex sentence, it makes sense. After I heard the alarm, well, what about it? I got up. We do not need a comma because the independent clause came first. I'm going to let you finish this and then I'm going to erase so that it's, because I don't think this is quite enough room to do what I want to say next and the example. So when the independent clause comes first, the part that can stand alone, you do not need a comma between the clauses. So I do not need a comma here. Don't write that. That is not necessary. However, when a dependent clause comes before an independent when a dependent clause comes before an independent clause, you do need a comma between clauses. So that means if you're writing a sentence, if you're writing a complex sentence and the dependent clause comes first, you have to figure out where does that comma go. It goes between the clauses. For example, after I heard the alarm, comma, I got up. After I heard the alarm, comma, I got up. So we have our dependent clause. After I heard the alarm, because after makes it not make sense. I heard the alarm makes sense. After I heard the alarm does not make sense by itself. But we added the independent clause, I got up, to make it make sense. But the dependent clause came first, so I had to put a comma. Now, where do you place the comma? Well, if your independent clause comes first, you don't need one at all. But if your dependent clause comes first, then you need to put the comma at the end of the predicate in your dependent clause. After I heard the alarm, which part of that is the predicate? Carla?
Heard the alarm.
Heard the alarm. So since my dependent clause comes first, right at the end of my predicate, I'm going to put the comma. So the comma goes between the end of the predicate in the dependent clause and the beginning of the subject in the independent clause. Let's write that as a note so that you have it to look back at. Can I erase the example? Are you finished with the example? Okay. Just so that I have room. Otherwise, I have to write down here, and my handwriting gets worse and smaller, and I want to make sure that you guys at home can really read it. Obviously, you guys are going to put this underneath the example. The comma goes between the predicate of the dependent clause and the subject of the independent clause. So the comma, when you have a complex sentence where the dependent clause comes first, the comma goes between the predicate of the dependent clause and the subject of the independent clause. Anytime you do need a comma, you're going to see that connecting word first. You know you need a comma somewhere when the connecting word is the first word of the sentence. I'm going to write one more example. After the concert ended, I'm not going to put the comma yet, but so you will add a comma. After the concert ended, Henry tried to get an autograph. Period. Don't forget end punctuation. It is extremely important. After the concert ended, Henry tried to get an autograph. When everybody's ready, we'll talk about where the comma goes and why we know that this sentence needs a comma. So when you're done writing this sentence, put your pencil down. If you think you know where the comma goes, you can go ahead and put it, but make sure that you check to make sure once we put it together, make sure that you check to make sure that you have it in the same place. If you think you know where the comma goes, go ahead and put it down. But make sure that once we've done it together, you have it in the right place. If you really have no idea, don't guess. Don't put anything. We'll do it together. But if you think you know, go ahead and put it down. Okay. So we know the comma goes between the predicate of the dependent clause and the subject of the independent clause. How do we know that in this sentence the dependent clause came first? How do we know in this sentence, after the concert ended, Henry tried to get an autograph? How do we automatically know the dependent clause came first and we need a comma somewhere? Smith?
Because the word after is the first one in the dependent clause.
Good. Our sentence, our whole complex sentence starts with the word after. After is a connecting word. So that means if our sentence starts with the word after, we either have a fragment because all we did was write a dependent clause, or it's a complex sentence that needs a comma somewhere. Because when the dependent clause comes first, you do need a comma. Smith, what is the dependent clause in this sentence?
After the concert ended.
Good. after the concert ended is the dependent clause. Because a dependent clause starts with a connecting word, like after, has a subject, like the concert, and has a predicate, like ended. We know the dependent clause ends when we get to the subject of another clause. Henry is a different subject. So we know the dependent clause or the first clause has to end at the end of the first predicate. Ended is the first predicate. Smith, what's the independent clause in this complex sentence?
Henry tried to get an autograph.
Good. We know that is the other clause, the independent clause, because it does not start with a connecting word. It starts with the subject, Henry, and ends with the predicate, tried to get an autograph. So, Smith, do we need a comma in this complex sentence?
Yes.
Why?
Because there are two subjects and two predicates in one sentence.
But we know that if the independent clause comes first in a complex sentence, do we need a comma?
No.
No. So why do we definitely need a comma in this complex sentence? Yes, we have two subjects and two predicates, but if the independent clause came first, we would still have two subjects and two predicates, but we wouldn't need a comma. Why do we need a comma in this particular complex sentence?
Because there's no word such as and, but, or in the sentence.
Smith, look at your notes that start when a dependent clause. Did you find it, Smith?
No.
It's right. It's not much before this sentence. Carla, do you see it? What does the note say, Carla?
When a dependent clause comes before an independent clause, you do need a comma between clauses.
Did you find that, Smith? Thank you, Carla. So, why do we need a comma here, Smith?
Because when an independent clause comes before an independent clause, you do need a comma.
When a dependent clause, like after the concert ended, comes first, you do need a comma between the clauses. So since the dependent clause came first, after the concert ended, you do need a comma. If we flipped the clauses in this sentence and said, Henry tried to get an autograph after the concert ended, we do not need a comma because when the independent, everybody listen, when the independent clause comes first, you do not need a comma. Does everybody understand? When you have a complex sentence, you are combining an independent clause and a dependent clause. If the independent clause comes first, you do not need a comma. But if you have a complex sentence, that means you're combining independent and dependent clauses, and the dependent clause comes first, you do need a comma. If you have a compound sentence and both clauses are independent, you do need a comma, but you're not combining it with any words other than and, but, or, for, so, nor, yet. But we are not going to talk about those. If you see and, but, or connecting the two independent clauses, that means you've got a compound sentence. You always need a comma no matter what. If you see a word other than and, but, or, like after, because, since, after, where, when, if, whatever, that is a complex sentence. If the dependent clause comes first, that means the first word of your sentence is a connecting word. You will need a comma after that first clause. If the independent clause comes first, you do not need a comma. Okay. is everybody with me so far? I'm not sure because I see a lot of this. So let's see. Helper number 1, please sanitize, erase, sanitize. You should be on the page that looks like this. It has GP under the name. Now this looks like what we did on Wednesday. I should have switched the independent clauses. Oops. I should have, this is why I keep writing IP, because I keep getting independent clause and independent practice mixed up. I should have switched the independent practices, but I didn't realize until it was too late. This one would have been better to do the other day because it does not say complex sentence. However, we're doing the exact same thing because everything that we did on Wednesday was introducing complex sentences. We just did not give it a name. So, I hate when it just turns off. And the whole point was just so we don't have to wait for it to turn on. So now, let's look at the box at the top. Now you're officially going to look at boxes. I didn't want you to look at boxes the other day because it was talking about complex sentences, and I didn't want to confuse you because we had not named these types of sentences yet. But it's what we've been doing since Wednesday. Complex sentences. This does not have the word complex sentence, so I should have done this on Wednesday, and we should have done what we did on Wednesday today. But oh well, because it's the exact same thing. So, let's go ahead and read the sentences in the box. Read the first bullet point, Victoria.
A conjunction joins words, groups of words, or sentences.
Okay? Go ahead and read the second one too.
And but or combine sentences.
We're going to put in parentheses compound sentences. Because we would not use and, but, or in what type of sentences that we learned about today. What type of sentences will not have and, but, or used to combine clauses? Victoria. Complex sentences. So, Smith, we put compound sentences in parentheses after the second bullet point because and, but, or will combine compound sentences, not complex sentences. Victoria, go ahead and read the sentence in the bullet point.
Some conjunctions tell where, when, why, how, or, under, but.
Good, I see you chunking. Good idea. Good strategy.
What does the I make between the and the con?
It's just a short I sound.
Conjunction?
Short I. You said long I. And I like how she's asking me these questions instead of waiting for me to give her the answer.
Condition.
There you go. Condition. Very good. So this is a list of conjunctions that tell us where, when, why, how, or under what condition. Words like where, as soon as, when, before, after, why, because, since, how, as if, as though, although, if, and unless. These words are used to combine sentences in complex sentences. So and, but, or are used to combine clauses in compound sentences. The rest, these connecting words, these conjunctions like this, now there are more than this, but this is just a pretty complete list, are used to combine clauses in complex sentences. So and, but, or you will only see in combining clauses in compound sentences. These you will see combining clauses in complex sentences. Now, just because we don't use and, but, or to combine sentences in complex sentences, or I'm sorry, combine clauses in complex sentences doesn't mean we're not going to see it. But if we do see it, it's because it's combining subjects to make compound subjects or predicates to make compound predicates, or they're writing a list. I'm hoping that we'll see it somewhere here, but we might not. Now, number one, so what we're going to do is we're going to combine each pair of sentences using the given conjunction. We are creating complex sentences. So that this so that this page has the fact that we are doing complex sentences, write it here. Make complex, make sure you're writing complex, not compound, sentences. Now, some of these we're going to flip-flop so that the dependent clause comes first. If the dependent clause comes first, what do we need between the clauses? If the dependent clause comes first, what do we need between the clauses? Colin?
A comma.
A comma. If the independent clause comes first, what do we need between the clauses? If an independent clause comes first, what do we need between the clauses? This may or may not be a trick question. Victoria?
No comma.
Nothing. No comma. Nothing. If the independent clause comes first, we don't need anything between the clauses. If the dependent clause comes first, we need a comma between the clauses. So number one, the night became very dark, a cloud hid the moon. We're going to use the word when to combine these sentences. Raise your hand if you think you know how you can combine these two sentences using when. Extra brownie points, that means not real points, but good for you points, if you can put the dependent clause first. Zadie.
When a cloud hit the moon, the night became very dark.
Awesome! What do we need in that sentence somewhere? Which clause did you do first? The independent or the dependent?
A dependent.
Dependent, good. So let's go ahead and write the dependent. Let's write that whole sentence that Zadie just said. But what are we going to have to add?
A comma.
Why?
Because you put the dependent clause first.
Good. Extra brownie points for Zadie. When a cloud hid the moon, oh, I wish they gave us more space for this, because even I'm having trouble fitting it. The night, so you guys might have to write teeny tiny, but make sure you can still read it. When a cloud hid the moon, the night became very dark. And what do we need at the end, Zadie? A period. Do not forget end punctuation. It's half a point each time. Which means if this was a grade and you did not put a single end punctuation, you would lose half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4 points. Even if you got it 100% right, but because you left out the end punctuation, you would have lost 4 points. Okay. Zadie, what's the dependent clause in this sentence?
When a cloud hid the moon.
When a cloud hid the moon, because we have the subject, a cloud, and we have the predicate, hid the moon. But what makes this an independent clause, Zadie?
When.
When. What's the independent clause?
The night became very dark.
The night became very dark. We have the subject, the night. Remember, we're underlining the dependent clauses twice and the independent clause once. What do we need to put between those two clauses?
Comma.
A comma. If we said, the night became very dark when a cloud hid the moon, does that still make sense, Zadie?
Yes.
Yes. But do we need a comma?
No.
No. If we said the night became very dark when a cloud hid the moon, the independent clause comes first, so we would not need a comma. Good. Number 2. We have Gracie reads books about the moon. We have the sentence, she comes home. And then we have the conjunction, as soon as. Who thinks that they can combine these sentences with either one? Which one do you think works? Zari, how would you combine these sentences? You can choose how you want to do it. Just make sure it's the right choice.
As soon as Gracie reads books about moon.
Wait, you're
The
skipping
moon.
words. Zari, start from the beginning. And just read it again because you skipped a word. But I want to make sure that we have the whole sentence.
Gracie reads books about the moon as soon as she comes home.
Good. So let's write exactly what you just said, Zari. Gracie reads books about the moon as soon as she comes home. And what do we need at the end, Zari?
A period.
A period. Okay, Zari, which part is the independent clause? Which part of that sentence is the independent clause?
Gracie reads books about the moon.
Good. Gracie reads books about the moon. We have our subject, Gracie, and we have our predicate, reads books about the moon. Which part is our dependent clause, Zari?
As soon as she comes home.
As soon as she comes home. We have the subject, she, and we have the predicate, comes home. But what makes this a dependent clause, Zari?
I couldn't hear you.
We have the subject, she, and we have the predicate, comes home. But what makes this a dependent clause?
As soon as.
As soon as. Good. Which one comes first, the independent or the dependent clause, Zari?
Independent.
Do we need a comma?
No.
No. If I said this, as soon as she comes home, Gracie reads books about the moon. Does that make sense? Colin?
No.
Did you think about the sentence before you said no? Well, the only other answer is yes. So that means if you didn't have your hand up before and I said, are you sure about that? Then if you put your hand up, I know you're only putting your hand up because you know the only other option is yes. That does make sense. As soon as she comes home, Gracie reads books about the moon. Because it's still saying the same exact thing. She got home, she started reading a book. Whether I have it first, whether she came home first, and then I say she read books about the moon, or if I say she read the books about the moon, as soon as she comes home, it still makes sense. But if I said, as soon as she comes home, Gracie reads books about the moon, I would need a comma. But what if I said this? Think about it before you raise your hand. In fact, I don't even want you to raise your hand. I just want you to think right now. So please, you should be looking up, not playing with your pencils. As soon as Gracie reads books about the moon, she comes home. As soon as Gracie reads books about the moon, she comes home. Does that make sense? If we put as soon as before Gracie reads books about the moon, does that make sense? Carla?
Yes.
Does it?
No.
No. Why?
Because as soon as will this be saying
Would she come home as she reads the books?
no.
No. That would be saying as soon as she reads books about the moon, well, she wouldn't even have a chance because she's got to go home. But if we say as soon as she comes home, that means she got home, she's there, she just got home, she can start reading books. But if she just started reading books about the moon, is she going to go home? No. So you have to make sure you can't just put the conjunction before either sentence. You have to pick the one that works the best. Victoria, pay attention. You can't just put it before either one. You have to pick which one makes more sense. Sometimes it really doesn't matter, but a lot of times it does. Number 3, people weigh less on the moon. Gravity is weaker there, and we need to use because. Who thinks that they can combine these sentences into a complex sentence? Smith.
People weigh less on the moon because gravity is weaker there.
Good. People weigh less on the moon because gravity is weaker there. And what do we need at the end?
Period.
A period. Good. Smith, what's the independent clause?
Gravity is weaker there.
So listen, everybody listen. If we said gravity is weaker there was the independent clause, that would mean that the other clause is people weigh less on the moon because. Is that true, Smith?
No.
So, is gravity is weaker there the independent clause?
No.
No. Because then that would mean because has to be in one of those clauses. If gravity is weaker there was the independent clause, that would mean the dependent clause was people weigh less on the moon because. But can because go at the end of a clause? Smith?
No.
No. It has to go at the beginning. So, Smith, what is the independent clause in this sentence?
People weigh less on the moon.
People weigh less on the moon. We have our subject, people, and we have our predicate, weigh less on the moon. Dependent clauses must start with a connecting word, not end with a connecting word. So, Smith, what is the dependent clause?
Because gravity is weaker there.
Because gravity is weaker there. We have our subject, gravity, and our predicate is weaker there, but that word because makes it a dependent clause. Remember, dependent clauses start with the connecting word. They don't end with a connecting word. Nothing can end with a connecting word. Smith, do we need a comma here?
No.
Why?
Because the independent clause is at the beginning of the sentence.
Good. Number 4, I've studied stars and planets. I was 8 years old, and we need to use since. Cullen.
I've studied stars and planets since I was 8 years old.
I studied stars and, yes we do, planets since I was 8 years old. And then we need a what?
Period.
Period. Colin, which part of this is the independent clause?
I've studied stars and planets.
I've studied stars and planets. Because we have the subject I've, we've had the predicate study, we have the subject I, not I've. VE is short for have. So we have the predicate have studied stars and planets. What is the dependent clause?
Since I was 8 years old.
Since I was 8 years old. We have the subject I, we have the predicate was 8 years old, but the word since makes it a dependent clause. Do we need a comma here?
No,
Why?
because our independent clause is first.
Good. Now, we have the word and. I thought and was only in compound sentences. But is this and combining independent clauses? Is this and combining independent clauses? Cullen?
No.
No, it's just combining two things in a list. So make sure, if you're looking for and, make sure that you only need a comma to make a compound sentence if you're combining two independent clauses, two thoughts with a subject and a predicate. Not two subjects, not two predicates, not two items in a list, like in this case. Okay, good. Number 5, I always put on my spacesuit. I leave the ship, and we want to combine using the word before. Who thinks they can do it? Brownie points if you can do it. Aaron, have you done one yet? Okay, go ahead. How would you combine this? Bonus brownie points if you can put the dependent clause first correctly.
Before I leave the ship, I always put on my spacesuit.
Good. Let's write it exactly as she said it. Before I leave the ship, I always put on my space suit. Aaron, what's the independent clause in that sentence?
I always put on my spacesuit.
Good. I always put on my spacesuit. We have the subject I, the predicate, we have the predicate always put on my spacesuit. We have no connecting word at the beginning. What's our dependent clause?
Before I leave the ship.
Before I leave the ship. We have the subject I and the predicate leave the ship, but that word before makes it a dependent clause. Do we need a comma here, Aaron?
Yes.
Why?
Because if the dependent clause comes first in a sentence, you always need a comma.
Yes. Where does the comma go?
In between the dependent clause and the
So if I had to underline this, how would I know that my dependent clause ended? I would put it at the end of what part of that dependent clause? Look at your notes. Where does it say where to put the comma? Find the part. It's towards the end. Colin, did you find it?
Mm-hmm.
What does it say? Read it loud. Aaron, keep looking, but when she starts saying it, you may be able to find it. So keep looking.
I did find
You found it? Okay, well, we'll let Aaron. Aaron, where do you put the comma in a complex sentence if the dependent clause comes first?
The comma goes
Louder.
The comma goes between the predicate of the dependent clause and the subject of the independent clause.
Good, so what's the predicate of the dependent clause? Just the action.
I leave the ship.
Is I part of the action?
Leave the ship.
Leave the ship. And what's the subject of the independent clause? So who's doing the action in the independent clause? Victoria, can you help her out?
I always put on my spacesuit.
Is that the subject of the independent clause? Is I always put on my spacesuit doing the action? Is that a person that's doing the action? I. So we put our comma between the predicate of the dependent clause, which in this case is leave the ship, and the subject of the independent clause, I. Now this is a really good example of why we have to make sure we put the connecting word before the correct clause. Because if I put the connecting word before, I always put on my spaceship. I always put on my spacesuit. We would be saying, before I always put on my spacesuit, I leave the ship. Or I leave the ship before I put on my spacesuit. Would that work? If you left before, let's see, if I said this, think about it, please. I leave the ship before I put on my spacesuit. Does that make sense? Why? Why can we not put before I always put on my spacesuit? Kingston?
It makes sense.
Why?
Because
I'm telling you it wouldn't make sense. Why would it not make sense? Why would it not make sense to say, I always, before I leave the ship, I always put on my spacesuit, I leave the ship before I always put on my spacesuit. Why would that not make sense, Kingston?
if you take off the spacesuit and leave your ship,
If you leave the spaceship before you put on the spacesuit, you are not going to survive. That is why it is important to make sure that you put the connecting word in the right place. Okay, so we have to go to art. So let's look at number 6. It says, remember we're doing complex sentences, so we are combining two independent clauses into one complex sentence. Where one clause is independent, it can stand alone. One clause is dependent, it can't stand alone because it has one of those connecting words that is not and, but, or. Okay, so number 6. You can't breathe on the moon. You bring an oxygen tank, and we need to combine using the word unless. You can do, it is your choice. You may do dependent or you may do independent clause first. Michaela, loudly.
you can't breathe on the moon unless you bring in oxygen.
Good. You can't breathe on the moon unless you bring an oxygen tank. Okay, Michaela, which part of this sentence is the independent clause? Which part can stand alone by itself?
You can't breathe on the moon. You can't breathe on the moon.
You can't breathe on the moon. It has a subject, you. It has a predicate, can't breathe on the moon. There's nothing that confuses us. If we need more information, it's just because we're curious, not because there's not enough written. Michaela, which part is the dependent clause? Which part cannot stand alone?
Unless you bring
Unless you bring an
an oxygen tank.
oxygen tank. Correct. We have the subject, you. We have the predicate, bring an oxygen tank. But that word unless makes it not make sense anymore. If we said, you bring an oxygen tank, well, that would make sense. It means go get an oxygen tank and bring it with you. But if we say, unless you bring an oxygen tank, you're like, unless I bring an oxygen tank, what? Well, we have to make a complex sentence in order for it to make sense. You can't breathe on the moon unless you bring an oxygen tank. That's why I said unless, because you can't breathe on the moon. So you better go get your oxygen tank and bring it. Good. Michaela, do we need a comma here?
No,
Why?
because the independent clause is first.
Because what?
Because the independent clause is first.
Good. Because the independent clause is first. Oh, I forgot. Go ahead and open your grammar notes so that you have them ready. Good job, those of you who thought of that. Just in case you need to look down. So go ahead and open your grammar notes to today's notes. Good. Number 7. Earth looks like a big blue marble. You see it from outer space. We're going to combine it using the word if. Bonus brownie points, just like all the others. If you can make it a little different. If you've already had a chance to do one, put your hand down. If you've already done one, put your hand down. Zari, I think you did one.
Yes, she did.
Yeah. Carla, you want to try it? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
What could it look like?
if you have it, if you see it from outer space, Earth looks like a big blue marble.
Excellent. Brownie points for you, Carla. Good. Let's write it exactly as she said it. No punctuation because we have to figure out, do we need it? So, if you see it from, Carla, can you mute yourself for just a second? Make sure you're writing.
Sure.
If you see it from outer space, Earth, we are going to keep Earth capitalized because it's not only capitalized because it's the beginning of the sentence, it's also capitalized because it is something called a proper noun, which we will be learning about in a couple weeks. Can't believe we're already almost done with sentences. I like when we get into parts of speech. If you see it from outer space, Earth looks like a big blue marble. Carla, what is the independent clause in this sentence? The part that can stand alone.
The independent clause is if you see it from outer space.
Does that make sense all by itself? We have a subject, you, and we have a predicate, see it from outer space, but we have the word if at the beginning. So if I said, you see it from outer space, then that would make sense. Any question you have would just be curiosity. But if I just said, if you see it from outer space, then you wonder, why is that word if there? So is that the independent clause, Carla?
Yes.
Independent clauses can stand alone. So can
Wait,
that...
no.
No. So which part is the independent clause, Carla? Make sure that you're listening to the word and really focusing. Which part is the independent clause and can stand alone?
The independent clause is Earth looks like a big blue marble.
Good. Earth looks like a big blue marble. We have our subject, Earth, and we have our predicate, looks like a big blue marble. There is no connecting word at the beginning that makes it not make sense. So, Carla, Smith and Zari, stop. Carla, we found the independent clause. Which part is the dependent clause? Which part cannot stand alone?
The clause is if you see it from outer space.
Good. If you see it from outer space. Because then you're waiting for more information. You say, well, why does it say if? Well, to make it make sense, we add an independent clause. If you see it from outer space, well, what about it? Earth looks like a big blue marble. Smith, I'm not sure why you're typing right now. Smith, what are you doing with your hands? Where should they be? If you are chatting, that is not okay. That is not what this is for. That's like passing notes at school. And that is not allowed. I'm going to figure out how to disable the chat because I have a feeling this is not the first time that has happened. Okay. Carla, we have our dependent clause, if you see it from outer space, followed by our independent clause, Earth looks like a big blue marble. Do we need a comma here?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Because it would not make sense if we didn't have a comma.
Well, why do we have to have a comma in some complex sentences? What has to come first in order for there to be a comma?
If
What has to come first? What type of clause?
we need to have a comma, you need the dependent clause to come first.
Good.
Then
Very good. So if the dependent clause comes first, we need a comma. Where does the comma go, Carla?
it goes in between space and Earth.
Good, because it goes at the end of the predicate from the dependent clause, see it from outer space, and before the subject from the independent clause, which is Earth. Good. Number 8. Astronauts visited the moon. The moon is over 250,000 miles away. We're using the word although. Ethan, have you had a chance yet?
No,
Okay. How would you like to combine it with using the word although?
astronaut is although
Wait, read it again because we can't really hear you and I think you might have skipped some words.
astronauts visit the moon. Although the moon is over 250,000 miles away.
Okay. Astronauts visited the moon, although the moon is over 250,000 miles away. Ethan, which part of that sentence is the independent clause? Which part can stand alone? Has a subject and a predicate, and it can be its own sentence if we pulled it out. Visited the moon. Do we have a subject when we say visited the moon? Do we say who or what visited the moon? So can that be a clause at all? No, it has to have a subject and a predicate. And we're looking at independent, so it has to be the one that can stand alone. The one that if we pulled it out and put a period at the end, it would be a complete sentence. Astronauts visited the moon. That is our independent clause. Because if we pull that out, Ethan, and wrote it by itself, and put a period at the end, it would make sense. We have a subject, astronaut. We have astronauts. We have a predicate, visited the moon. If I said astronauts visited the moon, it's a complete thought. The only question you would have would be if you were curious about it. So that means it's an independent clause. Now, the dependent clause, the one that can't stand alone, is what? Like you're yelling.
Although the moon is over 250 miles,
Not
250,000 miles away.
good. Although the moon is over 250,000 miles away, is the dependent clause. Because if I pulled it out to the side and wrote, although the moon is 250,000 miles away, even though it has a subject, the moon, and a predicate is 250,000 miles away. I think I forgot the word over. So even though I have a subject, the moon, and a predicate is over 250,000 miles away, that word although makes it not make sense anymore. So that is the dependent clause. Very good. Oh, do I need a comma here, Ethan? Why? What comes first in this sentence? The independent or the dependent clause? Dependent can't stand alone. Independent can. If the independent clause comes first, do we need a comma? Look at your notes. Find where it says when the independent clause comes first or comes before the dependent clause, what does it say about it? You're looking at the wrong one. Find the one that says when the independent clause comes before the dependent clause. Nope, we're looking for when the independent clause. That's the dependent. Independent and dependent are two completely different words. So find when the independent clause comes first. Who can help them out? What does it say about when the independent clause comes first? Zari?
You put a comma.
What does it say? What does it say in the notes? That's what I'm asking right now. And that's not what it says in the notes. So I know you're just answering to answer. Please pay attention to the lesson. Cullen.
When a dependent clause comes before.
I am not asking what happens when the dependent clause comes first. I am asking when the independent clause comes first. What does that note say? Do you see that you are looking in the wrong place, everybody who has given that exact same answer? Michaela, loud so we can hear you.
Independent clause was
Are you reading the note that starts when the independent clause comes before the dependent clause? Kingston.
when an independent clause comes before the dependent clause, do not put a comma between clauses.
Does everybody see that exact note? I want you to put your fingers on it because it's there. I'm going to check. Oh, how can you find anything? You don't have any spaces or any of the dots or any of the dashes to let me know that it's a new one. I copied exactly how I have it on the board so that you can find things. This is why. Good. 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 Those of you that are finding it easily, it's because you're copying the notes like I do, with the dashes and the dots and the indentions, and you put spaces between each little note. That is what will help you find these pieces of the notes easily. If you just write them all in one big block of text, they're going to be impossible to read and find the answers. You need to copy them so that they are easy to read and study from. If they're not going to help at all. Okay, so Ethan, this one, the independent clause comes first. We just saw the note that says, when the independent clause comes first, we do not need a comma. So do we need a comma in this sentence, Ethan? No. Because the independent clause comes first, which means we do not need a comma. Okay. So go ahead and put those to the side, and if you are at home,